And when we collect data, we want to become more rational, right? And at some point, maybe these systems we have are kind of smarter than the people who use it. How do we make sure also the users are intelligent and also still tend to take risks? Because many times, many opportunities get created through risks that people take that might not seem rational at some point. But if you go into this very, very strong data world, you might be more risk aversive and not use many opportunities that might lie out there.
Yeah. So hi. I would say that in the previous world, everybody used to say, just get everything, just get all the data, just bring it in. But what we're seeing right now is, again, as we say, once we get hacked and people are able to access the information, then that company becomes viable. I'll give you a typical example. Now, I'm not capturing any PII, personal data, or PCI data, like your social security number. We're just collecting data regarding the handset, the flow, money, algorithms, and we can get everything. So it's now a position right now in the States where you have to go through this, I'll call it an evaluation as to what data do we want to bring in. And if we do decide to touch any of those PII or PCI data, then you need to make sure that you have the the security, as in physical security, in terms of hardware, everything that's got to do with the cloud. If you have it physically, in a server room somewhere, you got to make sure that all these things are in place. Policies, who has access to it? Why do they have access to it? Okay, what are they using the information for? And I think a lot of companies in the U.S. are right now learning through a lot of all the lawsuits and and things is happening to make sure now that before they collect any data whatsoever, and I'll be very clear, there's a project right now that we were hoping that the credit bureau was going to hold the information longer than we expected, and they said no, only 90 days. So that means if we have to hold that data for 2 years, which is the bare minimum, we have to make sure that we have that whole infrastructure, all this process in place, and that's going to be costly to us, so that we don't get hacked. Anybody want to ask a question?
Yeah, and I would also like to add here that it's not only about collecting the data, using it as well, right? But what you do with the data later. And this is where a lot of the companies are looking at the ways and means, how to archive the data very effectively, store it for the regulatory reasons, some of that you talked about. And that archiving strategy cannot be an afterthought strategy. It has to be all-inclusive strategy at the time when you are defining that, how do I collect the data, extract the data, and put that as a part of the insight framework. So archival is very, very key. And obviously there are a lot of technologies who helps you once the insight has been generated, which data needs to be archived and which one is still needs to remain. Because once the insight is made, there are a lot of data assets which will lose its relevance and value. So that's something you have to keep in mind.
I'll just add, my view is that we're moving towards integration of data rather than data collection. So a lot of data points that organisations think they need, they don't need to store. So I think what we're sort of emerging and starting to see is connectivity into various different data sources. I mean, one example will be social media feed. You don't collect that data. You stream it, you bring it in, you integrate with that data set to make decisions, and then you discard. So there will be a lot of points of connectivity into various data sources rather than the pure traditional mechanism of collect, put it into a box, format it, analyse it, archive it. There will still be room for that, obviously, for transactional and operational data, but a lot of the decision-making data are going to be in the peripheral as a result of connectivity into those data sets. And given that you can do things a lot quicker right now without having that weighing down of data collection is going to be where the issue is. I forgot your philosophical question. It was about
the creativity side.
Right. Yes.
And also, if I may, one example is like you say, we have this translation programs.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like maybe a very nice poem and you translate it in one way,
Yeah,
but there is interpretation, right?
So the way I see it is, again, it's those ethics and parameters that you put in as you build these solutions. So I had an example from a university that were looking at using data and AI to make their university more inclusive for overseas students. In Australia, we're not very good at making them feel comfortable compared to US, where everyone travels around the States. And the mandate was very clear that the bot framework, which was going to interact with these overseas university students, had to have an element of that connectivity within the human interface. So the bot will help the individual integrate into the Australian society, into the university, but it didn't take away the human element of connectivity. So there were student advisory bodies that would intercept at a particular point to ensure that human aspect was not lost in it. And I think as we grow as a society and we start building these complex AI solutions, there will always be a human element where we would intercept and say no. So when we look at, again, going back onto the deep learning framework, there's really 3 categories in which we train AI through data. One of them is we allow it to do purely based on data and statistical analysis and correlation, and it will always be that very automatic way of responding. Another way is where we intercept and draw bias. You know, do not swear, it's not the right word to use. If you see these contexts, do not use it. And then another mechanism is for us to be very autonomous in terms of the bias and the criteria we put in. Just because it exists doesn't mean that we don't have control over it. I think the whole concept of this deep learning in the 50s was that these robots were going to take over and we weren't going to exist. But I think the reality is that as humans, we have the power to control the parameters of how we design this and where we bring in a human element to intercept.
I just want to add a couple of things. My experience is that whatever the programs are, whether it's artificial intelligence, big data, anything, is very much dependent on the environment that that particular industry is in. If it's a very highly competitive industry, these types of tools will come to the foray. And I've found, at least in the Australian context, there is a very wide range of skill levels. And the best way I can explain it is there are very few companies that play in the Premier League in Australia. We've got a lot of companies that play in the 2nd division, the 3rd division, and dare I say it, in the 5th division. So how competitive your particular market is will drive the use of these things. So, and that will then determine, well, how much data do you collect? So I think that environment really drives these types of tools. I think we are where we are because of competition, and I think competition will then ultimately determine how well things go.
Let me just add to what you just said just before you come in. So for your big light bulb moment, never. I don't know that AI will completely take over human beings because it's singular. Okay, I don't know that they're robots. I mean, they might be that have feelings, but again, just as Agnes has said, there's always going to be a time where humans will have to intercept at certain stages.
Yes, question.
So you talked about translation. Is sign language in the horizon? And also a second question is, so data are assets. Is there such a thing as disposal for archiving? And how do you actually dispose data and security?
Yeah. So if we look at our leader, Satya Nadella, talk about AI, his big message around accessibility. So sign language, any kind of accessibility that allows an inclusive society is top of mind when we look at AI. So we've just launched an AI for Health initiative. I encourage you to have a look at it. There's numerous amount of case studies in regards to the various ways we are using AI to improve the lives of those that have issues with accessibility and inclusion, and we are incorporating this as part of our lives. So we do have currently that I know of, one in Australia and one in US, blind engineers, software engineers, who utilise the AI technology. And there's a YouTube video on it as well if you want to watch it. To use the AI technology. So then we're looking at the next phase, which is the hearing impaired through the video of sign language. And if you look at any of the go-to-market, we just, not go-to-market, sorry, any of our events that we do, it's mandatory that we have translation services as well as capture with all of our events as well. So that reading capture is embedded in every piece of material that we release now in the market as well.
Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, you're saying that what are the criteria for determining the data disposition? Is that right?
So with documents, like there are legislations that requires you to keep it for like 7 years, 5 to 7 years, but what about data? How long must you keep it before you dispose it? And the disposal of it, what are the means for disposal?
Sure. So I think it primarily, driven by two factors. One is that your regulatory environment in which you're operating, the industry you're operating. A lot of the companies, a lot of the industry, they mandate that, you'll have to keep the data for at least 10 to 12 years. Not even 4 or 5 years will be very, very less for that. So that derives, right? Within that, I think you have to look at that what categories of data, is it the transaction that you need to, dispose it? Or what is the age of that transaction? So that is one of the factors. The second thing which also determines is that your overall data governance and this whole stewardship framework, the ethics, the security that you talked about, right? And that determines that what kind of tools and technologies that you need to put in. The very standard thing is that you can do a quick database archiving, right? And you just archive it. But that is not going to be sufficient, because tomorrow, if somebody needs that data because of regulatory reason, you need to have the access mechanism, the reporting, so that you can view the data and then you can relate it back to the transactions which happened. So these are some of the techniques which some of the companies are employing today. For the very, very large data sets, right, I have come across platforms like Hadoop, where Hadoop is not actually being used as a big data and the insight kind of platform, but primarily from the archival storage, because it's a cheaper commodity, it's very easy to do, a lot of utilities are available, so that your challenge of variety, volume of archiving that data sort of goes away. So these are some of the examples.
You just said, I'm just trying to put, again, that light bulb. So you're talking about deleting data, okay? Like we all know we have that shredder, you put it through the paper. Now, maybe we haven't thought about that. Okay, because big data is all about collecting or having data. But to her point, why would you have to collect data if you're streaming it straight, live and everything? So again, these are things that maybe you guys can come up with, as for new research and and stuff like that. Have theories around it. But again, it's just something that you guys can think about. Now we also have data mask, where you can mask your data. So. Yeah, so if I have your credit card, I only keep, a particular number, the last 4 digits. So again, it doesn't really, identify you. So I can, again, keep it for as long as I want to use as my, analysis. Again, another question to us, because this is still new. How long of the data do we really want to keep for the decision that we need to make? Okay, these are valid questions. I really like that question. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, not any more than, it depends on the regulations in each country in terms of, so I've worked on project where in a financial institution with the APRA regulatory reporting, it's 7 to 10 years, and we build a solution, and what we called was sliding window. So what you do is, as you get into that 3-month, 12-month reporting cycle, you slide out the data into a lower commodity data set, so whether it's a Hadoop structure. But if you look at where we've come with the emergence of big data and the cloud, storing data is really cheap now. So organisations have the flexibility to store as much data as they want for as long as they want.
All right, well, I think that's all the time we have for. I'd like to thank all our panel members for their time. Thank you for your questions.
I'd like to say a few words. Again, thank you to all the panel members. This is our last panel for today, and I'm surprised we have the amount of people we have. I thought we had 5, but this is really great. It's a good topic. Agnes, let me just make a few comments about yours. You talked about the opportunities in the global market, and I think it's a good spin to talk about the democratization of AI before we talk about the democratization of any other sort of information areas, and AI is going to be important. Also, I liked the last part where you look at digital data capture, and where you address, and I think you continue doing that in Microsoft in terms of accessibility and looking at addressing this. So on that one, I think I'd like to give you Agnes.
Thank you.
And just to help you in the way home. Thank you. Very Oh, you're going to pursue it now.
You said on the way home.
Oh, right.
Back on the taxi.
Right. Oh, boy.
That's Aussie rules.
I'll join you. Okay.
Silly.
All right, Wipro. Very interesting company. And I was interested to see what you saw as important in the market, and how business trends are now translating into technology trends, and what are the portfolio of offerings that you have to address them. So again, very, very interesting, and I think this gives us a lot more fodder for us to, as academics, to start researching. And so again, this is continuing from our last few days when we talked about how academics and the industry could collaborate. You know, this is giving us a lot more opportunities. So I mean, thank you very much for that. And Delta, our illustrious Delta. Bright star, and you gave us the data duck, and only gave us 5 seconds. Well, you know what? I've got it. And I want to know what my prize is. Oh, this is cheating, I got it. Okay, EBTR portal, and how that constitutes or has given rise to the ecosystem. Again, quite interesting. Some of the things that we think about in what constitutes ecosystems, and not just a small proportion of the decision making about what comes into the whole realm of it. And in your case, you are addressing the secondary market. So that again comes up with a number of implications from that. So I think this is what we would like to be looking at. Also, looking at developing some sort of information governance model. Right. So thank you again. Yes, Johnson. Vic, you have helped us in many, many different ways. And this is one where you've moderated and got people for our... I've got a few things for you to do anyway.
Just a few.
Yeah, so again, always a very interesting thing. The thing is, working with Vic is that Vic was my PhD student, and he finished on time, which is good. In Australia, there's always a big problem trying to finish PhD students in time. So he's done really well, and he talks a lot, and sometimes I don't know how to stop him, but I think this will help him. One more role for Vic, and this is a promise that I made to all of you, and I don't... Thank you, Ray. Yeah. Okay, so one last thing I'm asking you is that if you can just grab, all of you come and stand here, my resident photographer